I stood by the punch bowl in my faded blue blouse, the one with the stitching I'd mended 3 times. I knew better than to expect warmth from Marissa, but I didn't expect cruelty, not tonight. Her voice rose above the music. Some people really come to a party dressed like it's laundry day. Laughter followed, casual and cruel. Her champagne-coloured dress shimmered in the light, the same dress I'd quietly paid for when she said she couldn't afford it. I didn't flinch. I smiled, sipped my flat ginger ale, and let the shame wash through me like old rain. Sometimes silence is the only dignity you can afford. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below, they. Say people become invisible with age, but I started fading long before the wrinkles came. It wasn't time that erased me. It was the slow, quiet erosion of always putting someone else first. I was born in 1959 in a town where sidewalks cracked, in the same place as our mothers did. My own mother was gentle and bone-tired, always smelling of starch and onions. She worked the night shift at the hospital laundry, her fingers red from bleach and water that never seemed to warm up. I learned early that love didn't always come with softness. It came with effort. It came with a clean shirt laid out on the bed, with chicken cooked just the way you liked, with silence when words could wound. By the time I turned 18, I had no dreams of becoming someone big. I didn't want to change the world. I just wanted to hold one small corner of it together. I became a school secretary because it felt solid, reliable. I liked the rhythm of morning bells and the smell of pencils. Kids came and went, but I stayed. I kept records. I typed permission slips. I gave out band-aids to 3rd graders who scraped their knees on the playground. I remembered birthdays. I kept tissues in my drawer for crying 5th graders and overwhelmed teachers alike. Then I met Mark. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't rich. But he had a laugh that made you believe things could be lighter, even on hard days. We got married at City Hall with just a cheap bouquet and 2 smiling witnesses. He worked construction, and I kept at the school. We didn't have much, but we had enough. A small apartment, mismatched furniture, Sunday dinners with leftover meatloaf. When I found out I was pregnant with Daniel, it felt like my chest cracked open with joy and fear all at once. I remember holding my belly at night, whispering to him like he could already hear me. I'll make sure you always feel safe. But life has a way of cutting its own path. Mark died in a scaffolding accident when Daniel was only 8. The world tilted sideways that day. I still remember the look on Daniel's face when I told him, not the tears, the silence, that awful, bottomless quiet that falls when something precious breaks. From that moment on, I stopped being a woman and became a shield. Every decision I made after that was for Daniel. I took extra hours at school, cooked in bulk, and clipped coupons like it was sacred work. We didn't have new clothes often, but his shoes always fit. I stayed up late reviewing his homework. He never missed a field trip. He got into a good college on scholarships and ramen noodles, and when he graduated, I clapped so hard I bruised my palms. That's who I was. The woman behind the curtain, the pair of hands that stitched everything back together when it fell apart. I never complained. I never expected thanks. I thought that was what love was, doing the hard things quietly so someone else could live, out loud. When Daniel met Marissa, I tried. I really did. She was lovely in that way women in magazines are lovely, shiny, poised, never a hair out of place. She had a laugh like a wind chime and a wardrobe full of clothes I'd never dare to touch. I wore flats from the clearance aisle and sweaters I'd darned so many times. The sleeves told stories. She was polite at first, distant but civil. She called me Mrs. Talbot for months, even after I asked her to use my first name. I noticed the way she flinched when I brought my tuna casserole to the engagement brunch. She laughed with her friends about kombucha and yoga retreats, and I stood in the kitchen refilling deviled eggs no one touched. Daniel was happy, and that was enough. For me. Or so I thought. I never asked for anything. No room in their new house. No input on the wedding. I gave them money instead, A cheque I'd saved over 5 years, tucked into a card that read, "Build your life with love." They used it for the honeymoon. Marissa never said thank you. Still, I smiled. Still, I brought over groceries when Daniel mentioned Marissa was between jobs. I offered to babysit their dog, water their plants, run errands. Always small things. Always quietly. The kind of things mothers do not for credit, but for connection. But somewhere along the way, I became the wallpaper in their story. Always. There, never noticed. Once, during a dinner, Marissa turned to Daniel and said, "She always brings food like we can't cook." She didn't say it with malice. She said it with a smirk. I smiled back. But something in my chest folded in on itself that night, like an envelope never meant to be opened. I didn't want much, just a little space to be seen, a little warmth in return. But what I learned is this. When people decide your background, they stop hearing your voice, even when you're still speaking. That's who I was before everything changed. A quiet giver, a soft voice, a steady presence. The woman in the corner clutching her purse, watching her son build a life that had no space for her. But sometimes, even the quietest corner starts to tremble, and when it does, it means the foundation is shifting. I used to believe that giving made you good, that if you poured yourself into others, you'd eventually be full of something better than what you'd given up. But over the years, I began to wonder, what if you pour so much? There's nothing left of you but the echo of other people's needs. After Mark died, my world narrowed into a routine built around Daniel. Mornings started at 5. I'd pack his lunch before making my own weak coffee. I'd iron his school shirts until the creases could cut paper and leave post-it notes in. His backpack. "You've got this. Proud of you. Call me if you need me." He never did, but I kept writing them. I worked 2 jobs some months, secretary by day, library aide by night. Not because I loved either, but because I needed Daniel to have more choices than I ever had. Every dollar I earned felt like a brick. I was laying beneath his feet, hoping he'd climb higher, go further. I wore the same coat for 11 winters. It was grey, patched under the arm, and always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. I kept a mason jar labelled Daniel's Future in the top kitchen cupboard, filled with quarters, stray bills, the occasional refund cheque. I used to shake it, some nights, and let the sound comfort me. When Daniel turned 16, he wanted a used car. I sold my wedding ring to help him get it. He never asked me to, but I could see how he looked at his friends driving off, how his shoulders sank a little. Lower every time he stayed behind. I told myself it was just a ring, a thing, not a marriage, not a memory, just metal, easily melted, easily forgotten. There were countless sacrifices like that. Cancelled haircuts, skipped meals, dreams stored in boxes under the bed. I remember seeing a beautiful green dress in a shop window once. It was nothing extravagant, just soft and simple, with buttons like little stones. I touched the fabric through the glass and imagined how it might feel to wear something lovely just for myself. I walked away. Daniel needed new soccer cleats. That became the pattern of my life. Denial dressed up as devotion. I turned my own hunger into pride. When Daniel went to college, I sat in his empty room the first night and cried so hard I thought I might unravel. The house was too quiet. The routines had nowhere to go. I wandered like a ghost, unsure what to do with a life no longer wrapped around someone else. But I adjusted. That's what women like me do. We adjust. We shape ourselves to fit into the spaces left behind. After graduation, Daniel got a solid job. Marketing, suits, PowerPoints, big words I didn't quite understand. He started dating. Marissa not long after, and from the beginning I sensed the shift. She was elegant, confident, used to being the sun around which others orbited. And I was a constellation too far away to notice. Still, I offered help wherever I could. When they got their first apartment, I quietly sent them a Target gift card. When Marissa lost her job during a company layoff, I sent Daniel home with 2 bags of groceries, packed with love and low sodium. I didn't want praise. I just wanted to remain part of their story. I saw Marissa's eyes once as she opened a bag of my homemade soup. Not disgusted, just detached, like someone opening a package from an unfamiliar country. She'd say thank you sometimes, but never with warmth. Her voice always carried that polished glaze of politeness, the kind that keeps you at a distance. Told myself she'd come around. That kindness, even when overlooked, plants something beneath the surface. But the soil was different with her, less forgiving. My gestures didn't root, they just vanished. Daniel, for his part, seemed caught. In the middle, he loved me, I know that. But he had become fluent in Marissa's world, and my presence, my values, felt outdated, like an old dial phone sitting in a room full of tablets and smart devices. Still, I kept trying. I helped pay for their first home's down payment. I didn't tell Daniel how much I had to cash out of my modest retirement to do it. I just smiled and said, a mother's joy is watching her child build something new. But in all the building I did for them, I never built anything for myself. I never travelled, never bought that dress, never wrote the poetry I once loved as a girl. My life became a series of yes answers to other people's needs. And the hardest part, no one noticed. Marissa never asked about my favourite book, never wondered how I slept at night in that drafty apartment I moved into so they could have more space. Daniel didn't know I was still working part-time at the community centre. Just to cover rising rent, they were building a life. I was maintaining it from the shadows, and yet I kept showing up, to birthdays, to brunches, to baby showers I didn't belong at, always with a warm dish and a quiet smile. It's not that I expected them to bow in gratitude. I just thought, maybe one day someone would see me, not as Daniel's mother, not as Mrs. Talbot, but as a woman. A whole person. A person who just once wanted to wear something beautiful, not practical. To be asked, what do you need? Instead of, can you help? But I'd built my life like scaffolding, strong, silent, supportive. And scaffolding isn't meant to be seen. It's only meant to hold. But what happens when the thing you've held up your whole life starts to lean away from you? The shift didn't come with an earthquake. It wasn't a shout or a slammed door. It arrived quietly, like winter at the end of a long autumn, bare branches you don't notice until the last leaf falls. It was a Saturday in early spring. Daniel had called a few days prior to invite me to Marissa's birthday party. Nothing big, he said, just some close friends, a casual evening at the house. I was glad to be included. I told him I'd bring my lemon bars, the ones he used, to sneak from the fridge in the middle of the night. He laughed. Sure, Mum, that'd be great. When I arrived that evening, the porch light was already on. Music drifted through the windows, soft jazz, the kind Marissa liked to play at her dinner parties. I wore my best blouse, a pale lilac, one I'd bought from a thrift shop and spent 2 evenings carefully ironing. I carried my lemon bars in a covered tray, the way my mother used to carry hers, wrapped in a clean dish towel with stitched blue roses. Inside, the house glowed with curated warmth, scented candles flickering on mantels, charcuterie boards arranged like magazine spreads, soft throws draped just so across the arms of velvet chairs. Marissa greeted me with a quick, practiced smile. Oh, good, you made it, she said, as if I were a guest she had mildly forgotten. She took the tray from my hands without looking at it and placed it near the back of the kitchen counter, behind a pile of store-bought macarons. Thanks, she said, before turning to a friend in heels far taller than I'd ever dared to wear. I tried not to read into it. I poured myself a glass of ginger ale and stood near the wall of photographs, mostly candid shots of Daniel and Marissa at vineyards, ski resorts, trendy brunch spots. I searched for one of Daniel as a child, something with missing teeth or birthday hats, but the timeline began with their wedding. Everything before had been quietly edited out. At one point, I offered to help in the kitchen. Marissa looked up from arranging a tray of olives and said, "No need, you relax." But it wasn't kindness, it was dismissal. I knew the tone. I'd used it with overzealous parent volunteers in the school office. I sat on the edge of a cream-coloured armchair, hands folded, trying to shrink into something less visible. That's when I overheard it. Marissa was talking to her friend near the hallway arch, not quite whispering, but clearly not expecting me to hear. She means well, she said, but honestly, it's like she's stuck in another decade. I don't think she's ever worn anything that wasn't polyester. Laughter, quick, cruel. Another voice chimed in. She's sweet, but kind of quaint, right? I don't remember how I kept my face still. I just remember that my glass trembled, and I gripped it harder so it wouldn't spill. My breath slowed into something sharp and shallow. It wasn't the words. Not exactly. It was the tone, the air of amusement, the sense that I was someone to be tolerated, not loved. I left early that night. I made up an excuse about feeling tired. Daniel hugged me goodbye, distracted, holding a bottle of wine someone had just handed him. "Love you, Mum," he said into my hair. I nodded, but my throat was full of glass. It was a small moment. But something shifted that night. Something I had spent decades smoothing down finally rose to the surface, like a splinter that had worked its way through the skin. I didn't know it then, but that night marked the beginning of the unravelling. The next day, I found myself thinking less about the insult and more about the dress Marissa had worn. It was a champagne-coloured sheath, delicate and understated, with satin pleats that shimmered when she moved. I'd recognised it immediately. It was the same one I had seen her admiring weeks before while scrolling online, sitting across from Daniel at brunch. She had said, almost wistfully, "It's beautiful, but there's no way I can afford that. Right now." Daniel hadn't responded, and the moment had passed, but I had remembered. Later that week, I printed the dress page from the boutique's website and tucked it into my purse. I went home, opened the wooden jewellery box Mark gave me when we got engaged, and counted out the cash I had tucked away, money I'd saved from years of coupon clipping and grocery store rebates. I'd called the store, placed the order over the phone, and paid for it with my name left off the receipt. I told the clerk to include a gift tag, to Marissa, from Daniel. I didn't tell my son. I just wanted her to feel lovely, to feel chosen. I thought that might soften whatever tension there was between us. I never told anyone what I'd done. And that night at the party, as I stood beneath soft light, listening to her mock my clothes in the very dress I'd made possible, I felt something deeper than embarrassment. I felt displaced in my own generosity. I went home that night and opened my Bible. The receipt was still folded between Psalms and Proverbs, right where I'd tucked it. I smoothed it out, not sure if I felt regret or resolve. Maybe both. I was tired of being the scaffolding, the invisible support, the joke at the edge of the room. But kindness, once overlooked, can turn into something sharp, and sharper still when worn like a gift by someone who never knew the cost. The heart rarely breaks all at once. Most of the time, it wears down from the inside, chipped away by small, daily cuts no one notices but you. After the birthday party, I began seeing things I'd once excused. Moments I'd brushed off as misunderstanding now felt more deliberate. A pattern, not a coincidence. I remember the first time Marissa corrected me in front of others. We were at a family brunch, and I'd made a passing comment about their new kitchen backsplash, how the ceramic tiles looked so clean. She smiled thinly and said, "Oh, it's actually porcelain, but close." Her tone was light, but her eyes flicked sideways, scanning to see who heard. Everyone laughed politely. I laughed too, but it lodged somewhere in me, like a splinter under the nail. She didn't need to correct me. She needed to perform that correction. At the time, I dismissed it. She's particular, I told myself. She values details. But it happened. Again. And again. One time I brought over a tray of lasagna when Daniel had mentioned work had them both stretched thin. Marissa opened the foil, then covered it again almost immediately. "We're doing dairy-free this week, but thank you. I'll just freeze it in case we need it. Someday." She didn't even look me in the eye. Someday never came. I found the tray in the trash outside their house the next week, untouched. My handwriting still visible on the lid. Enjoy. Extra cheese, just how Daniel likes it. Then there was Christmas, They invited me, of course. I brought hand-knitted scarves, one for each of them, pale grey for Daniel, soft teal for Marissa. I'd stitched them during quiet evenings alone, while reruns played in the background and my fingers followed the pattern by memory. They opened their gifts together, surrounded by friends and candles. Daniel smiled, polite but distracted. Marissa unfolded hers, held it up like a piece of laundry, then said, "Oh, handmade. That's so nostalgic." She didn't put it on. Instead, she passed it to her friend Lisa to admire, who said, "It's like something my grandma used to make." I sat there with a smile stitched so tightly to my face I could barely breathe. No one noticed that I didn't speak for the rest of the night. Sometimes she'd borrow Daniel's phone to text me back. I could always tell. Her messages were short, dry, often ending in periods instead of exclamation marks. "Got it. Thanks." "Okay, noted." One time, after I offered to watch their dog while they travelled, I received, "We're covered, but thanks." The tone always made me feel like I was offering leftovers to people who had already eaten, and Daniel, bless his heart, didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to. He'd say things like, "She's just tired," or "She doesn't mean anything by it." Once, when I tried to gently bring it up, he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Mum, you're overthinking it." But a person knows when they've been made small, when their gifts become burdens, when their presence becomes an obligation rather than a joy. I began to retreat without announcing it. I started skipping events that required pretending. I stayed home on Marissa's sister's baby shower, citing a bit of a cold. I stopped sending elaborate care packages and instead mailed cards with polite well wishes. My handwriting grew smaller, my words more cautious, and yet there was always something in me that kept trying. I once saw Marissa looking longingly at a particular handbag on her Pinterest board. It was subtle, beautiful, nothing flashy. I went halfsies on it with Daniel. As her anniversary gift. I never told her. She posted a photo of it later with the caption, "From my love, he gets me." Another time, I spent hours repairing an antique photo frame that held a picture of Daniel as a boy. Marissa had mentioned in passing that it looked a bit too rustic for their modern decor. I refinished it, softened the wood, cleaned the glass, and left it on their doorstep in a box with a note that said, "Just in case you find a spot, for a little history." It never made it onto their walls, but I kept doing these things. I think I believed that if I could just give enough, fix enough, offer enough, I'd eventually be let in. Not just tolerated, but chosen. It's hard to explain the ache of being nearby but not included, present but peripheral, like you're in the room but always sitting behind the curtain, watching someone else's life unfold. The worst part was that I started to doubt myself. I began asking, am I too old-fashioned, too needy, too much, not enough? I stopped wearing the jewellery Mark gave me. I stopped bringing food. I even began to reconsider the way I dressed, wondering if maybe the polyester blouses really were the problem. I started keeping a tally of how often I was dismissed. I didn't want to. But when the pain becomes repetitive, the mind starts counting to survive it. One day I told my friend Doris during our weekly tea about some of it, just the edges. She looked at me quietly, then said, "You know, a paper cut doesn't seem like much. But if it keeps happening in the same spot, you start flinching before the knife even shows." She was right. These weren't betrayals. Not yet. But they were bruises. And bruises, if pressed too often, darken into something deeper. In my living room, on the end table beside my recliner, sat a small, unopened envelope with Marissa's name on it, never delivered. Inside was a letter I'd written after the Christmas scarf incident. I had folded it twice, sealed it, then left it untouched for months. I couldn't bring myself to send it, but I also couldn't throw it away. But paper cuts become scars when you keep pretending they don't hurt, and mine were starting to bleed through the smile. I didn't plan to break. I don't think anyone ever does. It happened 3 days after the party, the one where she wore the dress I'd bought and laughed at the blouse I'd stitched. I'd tried to swallow it, to fold that moment into the same corner of my chest where I kept all the other slights. But grief has a funny way of returning as weight. That night I felt it in my bones. The next morning, I got up like I always did. Made tea, washed yesterday's dishes, folded the worn blue throw blanket on the recliner, but everything felt heavier, like even my limbs were second-guessing me. I opened my fridge and stared into the dull glow of its light, wondering if it even mattered what I cooked anymore. No one was coming. It was quiet. Too quiet. That kind. Of silence that doesn't comfort. It confronts. It makes you hear yourself think, really hear it, and what I heard was an old woman holding on to hope like it was a receipt for something that could never be returned. Sat down at the table and looked across at the small plant Daniel had given me last Mother's Day. A pothos, he'd said. It grows fast, hard to kill. The leaves were still green, still curling upward like they didn't know what neglect was. I admired that about plants. They didn't need applause. Just light. On impulse, I pulled out the drawer under the phone and found the folded-up dress receipt, the one I'd tucked into my Bible after the party. I spread it out flat on the table. The date circled in red pen stared up at me. March 4th. I hadn't realised until then it was the anniversary of my wedding to Mark. The day I'd sent that dress. The day I'd traded one memory for another, hoping she might feel the kind of beauty I had felt when Mark first looked at me like I was the only person in the world. I laid my palm over the receipt and closed my eyes. What am I doing? I asked the silence. But silence never answers. It just invites more questions. A knock at the door startled me. It was the UPS man, dropping off a box I hadn't expected. I brought it inside and opened it. A food delivery subscription. Box. No note, no card. Just a label. For Marissa Talbot. They had sent it to the wrong address. Again. It wasn't the first time. Daniel must have accidentally listed my apartment on their profile months ago, and occasionally I'd get their mail or packages. I used to call them right away, offering to drive over and deliver it personally. This time I didn't. I stood there, with the cardboard box in my hands, and felt something splinter. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in exhaustion. I had bent and bent and bent until there was nothing left to give but the space I occupied. I sat down again, the box unopened at my feet, and wept. Not the kind of tears that beg for someone to see. The kind that rise from years of being unseen. I cried until I couldn't anymore. Then I reached for a pen and a notepad and began writing, not a message to them, a message to myself. You were more than what you gave. More than the meals, the money, the mended sleeves. You are not less because they saw less. When I finished, I folded the note and placed it in the envelope with Marissa's name, the one I'd never sent after Christmas. Then I sealed it. Again. I didn't plan to send it. I just wanted it to be real. That afternoon, I went outside for a walk. No purpose, no destination, just air, just feet on concrete. I passed the elementary school where I used to work. The bell rang just as I reached the edge of the playground, and for a moment I stood there, gripping the chain-link fence, watching the kids race into the yard like joy was something automatic. A little girl tripped and scraped her knee near the monkey bars. Another girl knelt down beside her, patted her, back gently and waited. No words. Just presence. It hit me then. I had spent so many years trying to fix things with words, with offerings, with gestures. But what I had needed all along wasn't to be thanked. I needed to be seen, to be accompanied, not praised, just held in regard. That evening I packed, up the unopened box addressed to Marissa, and dropped it at their porch. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I simply left it there and walked back to my car, every step feeling like a small reclaiming. I remembered something that hit me like a whisper from a past life. Daniel, age 6, standing in our old kitchen in mismatched pyjamas, looking up at me as I folded laundry. He'd said, "Mummy, you're like my house. You're always there." And warm. I hadn't thought of that in years. Funny how the purest love never needs to be taught. It just is. Prompt. Have you ever remembered something small, just when everything felt like it was falling apart? That night, I left my Bible open on the kitchen table, the receipt still resting inside it, next to the letter I'd written and sealed again. And for the first time in years, I slept through. The night without waiting for a phone call, a text, or an apology. I stopped waiting. I started waking up. Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace? But sometimes the peace you protect becomes the prison you live in, and I was finally finding the key. The first thing you notice after you stop speaking isn't the silence, it's how loud everything else becomes. The hum of the refrigerator, the groan of old floorboards, the sound of your own breath as it slows. When I stopped trying, really stopped, there was a strange kind of clarity. Like when a storm clears and you realise just how soaked the earth had become. I didn't reach out after that last package mix-up. I didn't call Daniel to ask if they received it. I didn't send a follow-up text or check in the next day, and for 3 days no one noticed. Or if they did, they said nothing. It was as if my silence had been built into the background, like the ticking of a forgotten clock, missed only when it stops completely. On Thursday, my phone rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I watched it buzz in my palm, but I didn't answer, not out of spite, out of sheer depletion. I couldn't find the energy to make excuses for my absence or smooth over the pause with false cheer. He left a voicemail. Hey Mum, just checking in. Haven't heard from you. Hope everything's okay. That was all. No, I miss you. No, we've been thinking about you. Just checking a box. I went about my day like a woman untethered, washed laundry, swept the floor, watered the pothos. It had sprouted a new leaf. Funny how things still grow even when you feel like you can't. Friday came, and with it the usual invitation. Marissa's text, brief and clipped. Hosting a small dinner on Sunday, come if you want, 5 p.m. No greeting, no warmth, just coordinates. I read it 3 times before pressing delete. Not decline, not reply. Just erase. And yet, despite the quiet, something inside me felt louder than it ever had. Not angry, not righteous, just still. That Sunday, I chose not to go. I made a pot of lentil soup and curled up with a library book I'd renewed twice and never cracked open. I turned my phone to silent and watched the sun set through the sheer curtains I'd stitched myself the year Daniel moved out. At exactly 6:42 p.m, I received another text from Daniel. Everything okay, Mum? Marissa said you didn't reply, she's worried. I laughed quietly into my soup. Worried. That was rich. I didn't respond. Because the truth is, I had finally made peace with something that used to haunt me. Not every silence has to be filled. Not every question deserves an answer. A week later, Daniel and Marissa came by unannounced. I heard the knock and saw their car through the window, parked slightly crooked, as if they'd rushed over. I opened the door slowly. Hi, Mum, Daniel said, trying to sound casual. Marissa stood beside him, hands tucked into the sleeves of a camel-coloured coat. She looked smaller than usual, tense, toned down. We were in the area, Daniel said. Thought we'd stop in. I stepped aside. They entered. I didn't offer coffee, didn't rush to fill the air with light conversation. They sat on the couch. I remained standing. I was surprised you didn't come last Sunday, Daniel began. I wasn't, I said gently. There was a beat of silence. Then Marissa spoke. If something's wrong, we'd rather talk about it than, guess. I nodded, walked to the bookshelf, pulled out my Bible. I opened it slowly to the spot where the dress receipt still rested, folded neatly beside the letter with her name on the front. I didn't hand it to her. I didn't even mention it. Instead, I closed the Bible again, softly, and said, Some things don't need to be talked through. They just need to be seen. Neither of them spoke. The silence in that moment wasn't uncomfortable. It was instructional. After they left, I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my chair, the quiet wrapping around me not as a punishment, but as peace earned. Over the next few days, I kept to myself. I walked to the market. I rejoined the quilting group I'd stopped attending. I even signed up to volunteer at the library again, this time helping seniors learn how to use email and order groceries online. There was something comforting about sitting beside someone and watching them rediscover autonomy. One woman, Gloria, looked at me while learning how to open a browser tab and said, "Isn't it strange, all the things we learn late in life, when we finally have time to feel them?" I smiled. "Strange, yes, but never too late." On Saturday, I found a letter in my mailbox, handwritten, addressed simply, "Mum." Inside was a card, not store-bought, just folded notebook paper, Daniel's handwriting. "I've been thinking a lot. About what we notice, about what we don't. I'm sorry. I think I've confused peace with avoidance. I thought by keeping things light I was making things easier. But maybe I was just choosing silence over truth. I love you. I see you." I read it 3 times before placing it beside the receipt in my Bible. Not for pain, but for memory, for proof that even silence, when honoured, can speak. There was a moment when Daniel was around 10. We were sitting on the porch during a summer. Thunderstorm, lightning far off in the distance. He asked, "Why don't you ever yell like other mums?" I answered, "Because sometimes silence makes people listen better." He had nodded, not really understanding. I think maybe now he does. The silence had done its job. And now something else was beginning to speak, not anger, not grief, but clarity. Silence isn't just the absence of noise, it's the reordering of the soul after a rupture. And in the days that followed that small moment, the moment I chose not to reply, not to explain, not to repair, something within me began to settle like dust on undisturbed furniture. The first thing I noticed was how much more space I had. Not in my apartment, it was still the same size, still smelled faintly of lavender and old books. But within me there was room now. I hadn't realised how much space Marissa's moods, Daniel's half-hearted apologies, and my own constant self-censorship had taken up. It was like suddenly finding a quiet room in your own house you'd forgotten existed. I no longer checked my phone in the morning. No more scanning for messages I might have missed overnight. I deleted old text threads. Archived voicemails I had played again and again just to feel needed. I let go, one small digital chord at a time. I returned to routine. Not the kind dictated by anyone else's schedule, but my own. I walked the long way to the grocery store, just to feel the gravel under my feet. I bought fresh herbs instead, of the dried ones I always settled for. I said hello to strangers, and didn't flinch when they didn't say it back. There's something empowering about being forgotten, and choosing to stay that way. One morning, I pulled open my hall closet, and found a dusty sewing box, tucked behind old winter boots. Inside it, threads of every colour, buttons I'd saved from coats long given away. I hadn't opened it in years. My fingers moved slowly, uncertainly, as I threaded a needle and began mending a pair of house slippers just for the comfort of doing something with my hands. It wasn't about fixing anymore. It was about remembering I still had the power to restore what was mine. "A week into this quiet," Daniel called. Again. His number popped up just as I was lighting a candle on the dining table, a ritual I'd begun for no reason other than beauty. I let it ring. His voicemail was longer this time. "Mum, I feel like something's off. I know Marissa can be a lot sometimes, but she means well. We both care about you. If I've done something, can you please just talk to me?" I sat with those words. If I've done something. I think what hurt most was the distance in that sentence, the space between knowing and pretending not to know. I didn't call back. Instead, I wrote in my journal that night, a habit I hadn't kept since Mark died. You become invisible one unnoticed kindness at a time. But you return to yourself in even smaller moments, a cup of tea steeped only for you, a scarf wrapped, not to impress, but to comfort. I am learning how to live without needing to be invited. It was Sunday again. I knew they would be hosting. I knew the guest list. Couples with polished shoes, laughter floating over lamb shanks and Pinot Noir. Baked banana bread that morning. Not for them. For the new neighbour, Claire, widowed, soft-spoken, always alone. I knocked on her door at noon and handed it to her wrapped in brown paper and twine. She looked stunned. For me? I smiled. No reason. Just because. That was the only exchange. No long conversation, no invitation in, just one hand to another and the quiet power of offering something freely, with no need for it to be returned. Later that evening, I sat near the window. From where I sat, I could see Daniel and Marissa's porch, crowded with shoes. Candles flickered in the windows. I imagined the murmur of voices, the scent of roasted garlic. They hadn't called again. I hadn't expected them to. I held my own, hand for a moment. Something I hadn't done since I was a child, alone in bed, afraid of the dark. This time it wasn't fear. It was recognition. 2 days later, I got a letter. Not from Daniel. Not from Marissa. From one of Marissa's old college friends. A woman named Sierra who had sat with me once at a holiday dinner years ago. She'd seen a Facebook post I had commented on, an old recipe I'd shared for pecan pie, and tracked. Down my address through mutual contacts. Her note was handwritten. I just wanted to say, I always noticed how kind you were. The way you folded napkins with care, even when no one was watching. How you brought out your old tea set even though the rest of us drank wine. I'm sorry if you ever felt unseen. Some of us saw. We just didn't know how to say it. You made that house feel like home. Thank you. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears catching me off guard. Not because of what it said, but because of how deeply I'd needed someone, anyone, to say it. I remembered a time when Daniel was in 4th grade. I had volunteered to make paper cranes for his school's International Week, 50 of them, all folded by hand. When I delivered them, a teacher said, "We didn't expect a parent to actually do it all." Daniel just shrugged and said, "My mum doesn't forget what people ask for, but somewhere along the way they'd forgotten what that meant. But sometimes silence isn't the punishment, it's the beginning of being heard in a way that finally honours what was always there." I didn't set out to start over, I just wanted to stop unravelling. After weeks of silence, of letting the air between us thicken like unspoken dust, I turned my focus inward, not in a grand, dramatic way. Just little things. I repotted my plants. I bought a new pair of walking shoes that didn't pinch. I reorganised my kitchen pantry. I let the afternoons stretch out without obligation, without waiting for an invitation that never came. The hardest part wasn't the isolation. I'd grown familiar with that. No, the hardest part was not explaining myself, not writing the kind of message that starts with, "I'm sorry I've been distant," even when I hadn't been the one to walk away. Let them wonder, I thought. Let the silence speak for once. I started going to the community quilting circle again. I hadn't been. In months, not since the holidays. There were 6 of us, all older women with stories woven as tightly as the fabric we passed between us. We sat around a folding table in the basement of the library. No pretences, no performance, just thread and time. It was there, one Thursday morning, as I sipped lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup, that I said it out loud for the first time. "I think they don't like me," I said softly, my eyes fixed on the needle sliding through muslin. "Or maybe they do, but only when I'm convenient." No one gasped. No one gave me a pep talk. What I got instead was understanding. Ruth, who'd lost 2 sons to time and a daughter-in-law to pride, patted my hand. "They don't have to like you," she said. "But they should respect you, and if they don't, the problem isn't you." That sentence stayed with me longer than any sermon ever had. The next week I signed up to tutor reading at the local elementary school, 2 afternoons a week. It was something familiar, grounding, the smell of sharpened pencils, the tiny desks, the crumpled spelling tests tucked into colourful folders. I worked with a little boy named Leo who struggled with phonics but loved stories about dogs. We read Clifford, the big red dog, so many times I could recite it backwards. Leo once looked at me with his crooked glasses and whispered, "You talk soft, but your voice is big." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, maybe both. That's what rebuilding looked like for me. Not revenge, not grandeur, just moments of quiet usefulness that no one could take away. Then, about a month into my new rhythm, something unexpected happened. Daniel texted, "Hey, Mum, can we talk?" Something came up. I stared at the message for a long time, not because of the words, but because of the shift in tone. It wasn't casual, it wasn't performative, it was careful, almost unsettled. We agreed to meet at a cafe downtown. Neutral territory. He arrived 10 minutes late, hair tousled like he'd run his hands through it too many times. He hugged me awkwardly. I could feel the apology in his posture, but none of it had reached his mouth yet. We ordered coffee. I waited. Finally, he looked at me and said, "Did you pay for that dress?" It hit me like a bell, sharp and immediate. I didn't even have to ask which one. He continued, "Marissa found the receipt. She was sorting old mail and found it folded in your name, inside the Bible you gave me years ago." I froze. The Bible. I'd forgotten I'd loaned it to him, last Easter, when he said he was feeling lost, spiritually tired. He'd said he wanted something to ground him. I'd handed it over without thinking, never imagining he'd actually open it, let alone stumble across what I'd tucked inside. I didn't know what to say, he admitted. She was embarrassed, angry. She said you must have done it to make her feel guilty. I shook my head. I did it because she loved that dress, because I thought maybe, if she felt beautiful, she might treat me like something more than background. He looked down. There it was. The twist, the turning point. Not the discovery of a truth, but the reaction to it. Marissa wasn't apologetic. She was defensive. According to Daniel, she claimed I had weaponized generosity, that my kindness made her feel manipulated, that it was emotional leverage, and Daniel, caught between us, didn't know what to do. So he sat across from me, asking for clarity, hoping I would soften it, smooth it, save him from the discomfort of having to choose. But I didn't. I didn't offer my usual out. I didn't say, "It's okay, don't worry, she's probably just stressed." I didn't cushion the truth. I looked him in the eye and said, "I didn't give her the dress to gain power. I gave it to her because no one else would. And I didn't sign my name because I didn't want the thanks. I just wanted to be part of something. But when someone takes a gift and turns it into guilt, that says more about them than me." Blinked, absorbing it. "She's not all bad," he said after a moment. "I never said she was," I replied. "But neither am I." We sat in silence after that. Not tense, not angry, just honest. He walked me to my car, said, "Thanks for meeting." I nodded. No hug this time, but he stood there for a few seconds after I got in, hand resting on the top of my car door like he wasn't ready to let it close. Then he walked away. That night, I finally opened the envelope I'd sealed months ago, the one with Marissa's name. Inside, the letter I had written but never sent. A simple, handwritten note that said, "I see the way you look through me. And still, I choose to see you with kindness, not because you've earned it, but because I still believe in giving where others take." I burned it in the kitchen sink, not out of anger, out of release. She didn't need to read it anymore. I no longer needed to explain who I was. They thought I would stay quiet, stay soft, stay out of the way. But even the softest voice has an echo, and mine was just beginning to return. People like me, women who move gently through life, who say thank you too often, who fold their pain into neat little corners, we are easy to misread. They mistake our stillness for surrender. They confuse our silence with defeat. They think if they step on us softly, we won't feel the bruise. They think we'll stay broken. After that cafe conversation with Daniel, I didn't fall apart. I didn't wait for him to call again, or expect Marissa to appear at my door with some shallow apology wrapped in a candle or a card. I simply resumed my life. But this time, I did it without waiting for permission. I bought myself a new handbag. Nothing fancy, just soft, good leather. I paid for it in cash and smiled when the clerk complimented the colour. I walked out of that store with my head a little higher, not because the bag changed anything, but because for once I chose something entirely for myself. I stopped bringing food to gatherings I wasn't invited to. I unsubscribed from Marissa's wedding blog emails and unfollowed their curated life on social media. Not out of spite, just preservation. There's only so much pretending one person can take before it starts to erode the soul. Then one morning, a woman from my quilting group, Eileen, called. Her granddaughter was in town with a newborn, and the house had become a whirlwind of bottles, burp cloths, and anxiety. "Would you come by?" she asked, "just to help us stay sane." I baked a casserole, grabbed a clean cardigan, and walked into a home bursting with raw, sleepless joy. The baby, Mara, was 3 weeks old and smelled like milk and possibilities. Her mother looked like I had once, tired, terrified, trying. I held Mara while her mother slept, rocked her slowly, not saying a word. And in that silence, I felt something settle back into place inside me. I hadn't lost my usefulness. I'd just been offering it to the wrong people. A week later, I ran into an old co-worker from the elementary school, Janet. We stood by the cereal aisle in the grocery store, exchanging updates. I told her I was tutoring again, volunteering, reclaiming little pieces of joy. She paused and said, "You look lighter." I didn't realise how much that meant until I was back home, putting away soup cans and smiling for no particular reason. They thought I'd fade, wilt quietly into my apartment, that I'd hover around, waiting to be remembered like a casserole covered in foil. But what they never understood is that some women don't fall apart. They reassemble, smarter, quieter, more deliberate. Then came the charity event. It was a fundraiser. Daniel's company hosted every year, art show, live music, small plate catering. I'd gone before, usually out of obligation. This time the invitation came addressed directly to me, not as guest of, not as an afterthought. Daniel had called. "I'd really like you to be there, Mum." Something in his voice felt different, not duty, something closer to wanting. So I went. I wore a navy blue shawl I'd knitted myself over a tailored blouse. I styled my hair in soft waves, added a pair of earrings I hadn't worn since Mark passed, tiny opals he gave me on our 10th anniversary. When I entered the gallery, heads turned, not because I was dramatic or dazzling, but because I carried myself with a steadiness that couldn't be ignored. Marissa was near the back, glass of wine in hand, in a silk jumpsuit the colour of bone. She blinked when she saw me, like she hadn't expected I'd really come. Her smile was polite, tight. "Hello," she said, eyes scanning me like she was still searching for the right way to place me. Not mother-in-law, not threat, not friend, just there. I nodded. "Thank you for the invitation." She opened her mouth to say something else but paused. Then she tilted her head and said, "You look different." I smiled. "I am." She didn't know what to do with that. She looked away. Later, Daniel approached me with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "Marissa said you're glowing." I chuckled. "Well, I've stopped dimming myself to fit into smaller rooms." He laughed gently. "I think I'm only now realising how much space you made for everyone else. For me, I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some truths don't require acknowledgement, they just require recognition." The next morning I walked to the market. I saw Claire, the widowed neighbour, sitting alone on her stoop. She waved. I walked over. "Someone left flowers on my porch," she said, holding up a small bouquet of yellow tulips. No note. I smiled but said nothing. Let mystery be its own kind of grace. At home, I opened my sewing box and finally started a project I'd put off for years, a memory quilt. I took pieces from old shirts, bits of curtains, scraps of Daniel's childhood clothes I'd kept in a cedar chest. I worked slowly, methodically. With each stitch, I felt a chapter of myself being honoured, reassembled not as someone else's support, but as my own storyteller. They thought I'd stay broken because they never saw how I was built. But now, with every quiet choice, I was reminding them, and myself, that I'd never truly fallen apart. I'd just finally stopped pretending I was fine. It didn't happen. In a dramatic blowout. There was no yelling, no broken dishes, no slamming doors. That's not how my story moves. The final confrontation came quietly, like the last drip from a leaky faucet after years of overflow. Marissa invited me to brunch, not a party, not a gathering, just the three of us, her, Daniel, and me. She sent the message herself this time. We'd love to catch up. Just an easy Sunday brunch. The tone was different. Clipped, yes, but cautious too. Like she knew the dynamic had shifted and wasn't sure yet how to navigate it. I read it twice, then replied with a simple, "Thank you. I'll be there." I spent that morning getting ready slowly, not in a rush to impress, not eager to prove anything. I wore a soft emerald blouse, one I'd bought a few weeks ago on a whim. It reminded me of the green dress I never let myself have. Around my neck, I tied a silk scarf I found tucked away in my mother's sewing box years ago. She used to wear it when she wanted to feel presentable, as she called it. I arrived right at noon. Daniel greeted me at the door. He hugged me tightly, longer than usual, a wordless offering. Inside, the table was already set, fresh flowers in a low vase, cloth napkins folded neatly, and a small plate of scones that looked store-bought but warm. Marissa stood at the stove stirring something in a pot. She turned, gave me a smile I couldn't quite read and said, "I made tomato bisque. Daniel said it's your favourite." I nodded. "It is." We sat, ate, chatted about nothing for a while, movies, the weather, Daniel's work. Marissa complimented. My scarf. "Vintage?" she asked. "It was my mother's," I said. She wore it on the days she wanted to be seen. Her expression flickered, but she didn't press. Then the moment came. I knew it would. After a pause in the conversation, Marissa cleared her throat and said, "I've been meaning to say, I know things have felt distant, and I hate that. I really do." I waited. She continued, "I think we just come from different places, and sometimes I don't know how to connect with you in the right way. But I'm trying." Her voice had the lilt of someone walking a balance beam, measured, rehearsed, hoping to land somewhere safe. Daniel looked at me with hope in his eyes, as if to say, "Please." "Let this be enough." I took a breath. "Thank you for saying that," I began. "But I'm not looking for performances anymore. I'm too old to barter honesty for comfort." Her face reddened slightly. "I'm not performing," she said, softly defensive. "I'm just trying to fix things." I nodded slowly. Fixing something means you have to acknowledge what broke it, not just that it's been uncomfortable. She looked down at her hands. Daniel said nothing. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope. I placed it on the table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked. "A receipt," I said. "For the dress." Her eyes widened. "I thought you knew," I added. "But now I want you to understand." She looked at Daniel. He gave her a slight nod. "I didn't want you to feel guilty. I wanted you to feel beautiful. I thought that if I showed you kindness, you might return it. Not in gifts, but in grace." Silence. "I'm sorry if it came across as manipulation," I added. "But that wasn't my intention. That's never been who I am." She looked at me then. Really looked. And for a second, I saw something beneath the smooth exterior. Not cruelty, not malice, just insecurity. A frightened girl dressed in sophistication, hoping it would be enough. "I don't know how to be close to you," she said quietly. "You're so composed, so sure of yourself. It makes me feel like I'm always saying or doing the wrong thing." I blinked. Of all the things I'd expected, that wasn't it. "You think I'm sure of myself?" I asked. She nodded. "I've spent most of my life wondering if I was in the way," I said. "Wondering if love meant being useful or being silent. I am composed because I have had to hold myself together. And I've spent years making space for others without ever asking for some in return. We sat in silence again, this time not heavy, just honest. Daniel reached over and touched my hand. I should have done more. I should have seen more. I squeezed his fingers. You were trying to keep the peace, but peace built on silence doesn't last. It cracks. As we stood up to clear the table, Marissa reached for the envelope again. I saw her hand hesitate, then she placed it back on the table and walked away. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. Later, before I left, I placed a small, wrapped box on their sideboard. Inside was the scarf I wore that day, my mother's scarf. A note was tucked beneath it. For the days when you want to be seen. When I walked back to my car, the sky was beginning to cloud, but there was no rain yet. The air was soft. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small or lesser. I didn't feel erased. I felt exact. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't demanded. But the confrontation had come and gone, and I had stayed whole. Proof that quiet doesn't mean weak. It means choosing your moment. And I had finally chosen mine. The truth rarely arrives all at once. It trickles in, hesitant, half-formed, testing whether it's safe to be known. But once it begins, there's no stopping. The veneer cracks, and suddenly everything you've tiptoed around comes pouring out. It happened 2 weeks after the brunch. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet call on a Tuesday morning. Daniel's voice on the line, unusually subdued. Can I come over? He asked. Alone. When he arrived, I had already set out 2 mugs and a plate of shortbread cookies. He sat at the table like he used to as a boy when something was bothering him, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. She's not doing well, he said after a pause. Marissa. I didn't answer right away. He sighed. She's been seeing someone, a therapist. She didn't want me to tell you. I raised my eyebrows, surprised. That's good, I said softly. That she's doing that. She told the therapist she never felt good enough for me. He paused again. Or for you. I looked at him, confused. Me? He nodded. She said, you have this calm, this strength, like you don't need anyone's approval. It made her feel seen in a way that scared her, like she was always falling short by comparison. I sat back in my chair. Of all the things I'd imagined Marissa might say about me, that wasn't one of them. I'd spent years folding myself smaller just to fit into her world, measuring every word, every gesture. And all the while she thought I was the one towering over her. She always thought I admired you more than I let on, Daniel added. And she was right. That landed heavier than I expected. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He hesitated. Because I need you to know. This wasn't all your fault. It wasn't even really about you. It was about how she felt when she looked at herself next to you. And I didn't do enough to make her feel safe. I didn't protect you from that. I stared at the steam rising from my tea. Daniel, I said after a while, I don't need protection. I never have. What I needed was to be seen. Not as someone useful or quietly dependable, but as a woman with her own shape, her own story. He nodded. I see that now. There was a long silence between us, not heavy or uncomfortable, just full. Then he said, almost as an afterthought, She read the letter you left. I blinked. The scarf note? No. The original letter. The one from months ago. The one in the Bible. I frowned. But I burned that. No. He said, pulling something from his coat pocket. You burned the copy. The original was still tucked inside, folded into the sleeve behind the back cover. He handed it to me. My handwriting, my words, creased from time. I see the way you look, through me. And still, I choose to see you with kindness. Not because you've earned it, but because I still believe in giving where others take. I felt the room tilt slightly. The paper had made its way full circle. "She cried," he said. "She didn't say much, but she cried for a long time." That Friday, Marissa came by. No announcement, no agenda. She knocked softly, like someone asking to borrow sugar. I opened the door. She looked tired but not worn down, just honest. "I won't stay long," she said. "Okay. I just wanted to return this." She held out the scarf. "You left it for me, but I think it was never really mine to keep." I took it, nodded. Then, without waiting, she placed a small bundle in my hand. A brooch. Gold, delicate, shaped, like a lily. I recognized it from her wedding day. It had belonged to her grandmother. "I want you to have this," she said. "Not as a peace offering, just as something that holds weight." I ran my thumb over the cool metal. "Thank you." We didn't hug. We didn't linger. She turned to go. At the last moment, she looked back and said, "You were never behind." "Me? I just didn't know how to walk beside you." Then she was gone. I stood there for a long time after, the brooch warm in my hand. For the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to fix anything. The damage had been done, but so had the repair. Not perfect, not complete, but enough. Enough to let the past settle without bitterness, enough to let the future unfold without fear. That night, I set the brooch beside the receipt and the letter, placing them together in a wooden box I hadn't touched in years. 3 small artifacts of a long battle. A gift that went unseen. A voice that had waited. A truth that finally rose. For so long, I had imagined Marissa as cold, dismissive, even cruel. But what I saw now was a woman who had simply been afraid. Of not belonging. Of not measuring up, of losing control. Her cruelty wasn't power. It was armor, and I had never needed to wear mine. Sometimes the truth doesn't free you all at once, but it loosens something inside, and that loosening feels like breathing for the first time after holding it for years. If you'd asked me years ago what closure looked like, I might have said an apology. A public one, perhaps. Clear, sincere, maybe even tearful. I thought healing required someone else's admission, someone else's regret, but that was before I learned the truth. Closure isn't something you get from others. It's what you give yourself when you stop needing it from anyone else. The Sunday after Marissa returned the scarf and handed me her grandmother's brooch, I woke up to quiet. Not the kind that aches, but the kind that fills a room like early sunlight. I sat in my favourite chair, wrapped in the quilt I'd pieced together from scraps of Daniel's childhood clothes. I ran my hand over a faded patch from his kindergarten field day t-shirt and smiled. I wasn't thinking about what Marissa had said at the door. I wasn't wondering if she meant it. I didn't need to know, because the real win, the lasting one, had never been about forcing her to see me clearly. It was about me finally seeing myself. I had wasted years trying to make kindness louder than judgment, hoping the casserole dish or the quiet smile or the hand-sewn gift would speak on my behalf. But I understand now. I was never invisible. I was simply giving my light to a room that didn't know what to do with warmth that asked for nothing in return. A week later, I received a letter from Daniel. Real ink on real paper. He said Marissa had been different lately. Not transformed, but softened. He said they had started seeing a couples counsellor. He said he was learning, slowly, that peace isn't made by avoiding tension, but by walking through it with open eyes. He ended with, "I used to think you stayed quiet because you didn't want to cause waves. Now I realise you were the still, water that kept us from drowning. I hope I can grow into that kind of strength." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same wooden box as the receipt, the brooch, and the old unsent note. Not to hold on to the past, but to honour how far we'd come from it. That month, I started something I never thought I would, a women's circle at the library. Just a group of us who had given too much, spoken too little, and needed somewhere to relearn the sound of our own voices. We met once a week in the side reading room with chipped teacups and open hearts. One evening, a woman named Janet, new to town, early 70s, still carrying the ache of a son who only called on holidays, asked me, "How did you forgive her? How do you sit in the same room with someone who broke you and not want to break them back?" I looked down at my tea, watched the steam twist into silence. "I didn't," I said. "I didn't forgive her because she earned it. I forgave her because I refused to carry her behaviour any further into my life. That weight belongs to her, not me." Later that week, Daniel called again. This time, not to apologise, not to explain. "Just to invite. Would you come speak at my office's women's leadership luncheon?" he asked. "Just share your story, about self-worth, boundaries, whatever feels right." I almost laughed. Me? A retired secretary? A mother who spent decades saying yes in rooms where no one looked up? But then I said yes. And I went. I wore a red blouse that day. Not a bold, screaming red, just the kind of red that made you feel awake. I stood at the front of a glass-walled conference room while 40 strangers stared at me politely. Waiting. I cleared my throat. My voice didn't shake. "I used to think my value came from how much I gave," I began. "How many needs I could fill. How quietly I could do it. I thought love meant being useful, agreeable, invisible." I looked around the room. Some nodded. One woman closed her eyes, just for a second. But I learned that dignity isn't found in being everything for everyone. It's found in being wholly yourself, even if no one applauds, even if no one notices, even if the kindness you give is never returned. A pause. I gave away pieces of myself for years, hoping someone would call it love. But love that requires you to shrink is not love, it's dependence. And quiet doesn't mean weak, it means controlled. It means deliberate. It means chosen. I don't remember what else I said. But when I finished, they stood. Some clapped. One woman cried. Another simply mouthed the words, "Thank you." Daniel came up to me afterward and whispered, "That was more powerful than anything I've ever presented in this room." I smiled. Not out of pride, but peace. I didn't need their applause. I had my own approval. What would you have done in my shoes? Do you believe quiet dignity is stronger than revenge? The next morning, I took a walk through the garden at the community centre. A small girl ran past me holding a pinwheel. It spun wildly in the wind, colours flashing, light catching on each blade. It reminded me of something Mark once said to me in passing. The wind can't be seen, but it changes everything it touches. That's what I had become. Not a storm. Not a gust, just a steady current, strong enough to shift the air. They had laughed at my quiet, dismissed my softness, but in the end, it wasn't revenge that restored me. It was restraint. And in that stillness, I became someone unshakable. When I look back now, it's not the parties or the insults I remember most. It's the spaces in between, the quiet car, rides home, the rinsing of dishes in a sink no one thanked me for using, the long walks around the block where I whispered prayers, even I wasn't sure anyone heard. Those were the real moments. That's where I began to wake up. For a long time, I believed my value lived in what I could do for others. If I cooked enough, stayed soft enough, smiled on cue, stayed out of the way, I'd be kept around, appreciated, maybe even loved. But that's the strange thing about self-erasure. You think you're making yourself easier to keep when really, you're just fading from view. And when they finally stop seeing you, it doesn't feel like betrayal. It feels like inevitability. The real transformation began the moment I stopped trying to be easy to love. I stopped twisting myself to fit their expectations, stopped translating my worth through the lens of how comfortable I made others. Instead, I began asking quieter questions. Do I like who I am when I'm alone? Would I still be this kind if no one noticed? What would it mean to honour the woman I've always been, not the one I was expected to become? There's a framed photo in my living room now, just one. It's of me and Daniel at the community library event, taken candidly by someone passing through. We're laughing, really laughing, about something neither of us remembers. But what I do remember is how light I felt that day. Not because things were perfect between us. They weren't. But because I was finally standing in my life, not her, beside it. I've stopped collecting evidence of what I've given. The receipts, the folded notes, the unsent letters, they all rest now in a small wooden box tucked into the back of my linen closet. Not hidden, not discarded, just at peace. Sometimes I open it, not to relive anything, but to remind myself of how far I've come. I trace the edges of that old dress receipt, run my finger over the brooch Marissa returned. They don't hurt anymore. They don't hold power over me. They simply remind me, even when no one saw what I gave, I still gave with an open hand. And that is not weakness, that is legacy. Marissa and I aren't close, not in the way people like to see in movies, but there's something quieter between us now, a kind of still respect. She doesn't pretend anymore. And I no longer try to win her over. She once sent me a photo of her wearing the red scarf I left behind. No caption, just the image, and I didn't need one. Some things, when they finally start to heal, stop needing explanation. Daniel visits more, often now, not out of guilt but out of ease. Sometimes he brings groceries, sometimes we sit in silence and listen to the radio like we used to when he was little. There's no performance in it anymore, no strained effort, just presence. A few weeks ago, he helped me put up new shelves in the kitchen. While we worked, he looked over and said, "You know, I used to think you were fragile, but you're the strongest person I've ever known." I smiled but didn't answer. Some things don't need replies. They just need to be received, and the Library Women's Circle, we're starting a new project, a memory quilt made entirely from fabric donations and personal stories. Each square comes with a note about what it meant, where it came from, and what was carried through it. Mine is a square of blue polyester, cut from the blouse I wore at the party that started all this. The same blouse Marissa once mocked. The same blouse I once felt ashamed to be seen in. But now it's a part of something beautiful, something whole. I walk more these days, not to escape anything, just to feel the rhythm of my own breath again. I wear comfortable shoes and soft scarves and buy flowers when they're not on sale, because I'm no longer asking permission to enjoy anything. I've also started writing. Nothing grand, just reflections, short essays, letters I'll probably never send. But it feels good to shape my story with my own hands, on my own terms. One of them begins. I was never the woman behind the curtain. I was the one holding the room together, even when no one noticed the seams. I'm still quiet, still soft-spoken, still the kind of woman who brings banana bread to a new neighbour and remembers to water the plants even after they've started. To wilt, but I've changed. Now I do it not to be needed, but because it's who I am. And that difference changes everything. So if you're watching this, and you've ever felt like the afterthought in your own life, if you've ever given more than you received, or waited for someone to realise your worth, this part is for you. You don't have to fight to be seen, you don't have to shrink to be safe, and you don't need revenge to feel powerful. You only need to return to yourself, not all at once. Just one honest choice at a time. I was never just the woman with faded clothes. I was the thread, quiet, hidden, but holding the whole dress together.